You're listening to Two Mics and a Guest, a podcast of people's stories and the career pathway that led them to where they are. And now your hosts, Michael Holliday and Mike Young. Welcome, everybody, to Two Mics and a Guest. I am Michael Holliday. Joined with me, as always, is Mr. Mike Young.
Good to see you again. It's been a while since we recorded one of these.
It's been a while since our last episode, and I apologize ahead of time. I have been a little under the weather recently, so I've got my hot tea here, and my voice sounds a little gross, in my opinion. But
I've always wanted to have your voice, man. I don't have that radio voice like you've got.
You know, it's a gift and a curse, Mike. Mike, who do we have with us today?
We have Derek Rowe, which I'm excited about having you here today. We were going to try to book you in the fall, just didn't work out. We've got you today and excited about it. He's our aerospace and aviation teacher at the high school, which I didn't go to a high school with an aerospace and aviation teacher. He was a longtime helicopter pilot in the British Army, also a mechanic and stuff, and has been in the States for 8 years, I believe.
8 years, yeah.
And man, we're fortunate to have you in Tullahoma, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you.
So,
I guess we've always kind of just assumed Tullahoma is pretty aviation-based city. We've got the Air Force Base here. You drive all through Tullahoma, and there's planes on poles here and flags and everything. So it's awesome to have, and it's only a matter of time before we got an aviation program here. But you were doing such great things at your previous place.
Well, yeah. I mean, I love aviation, and the fact that I'm passing my knowledge on to the youth of today is a privilege as far as I'm concerned.
The pilots I know, it's addictive, and they're evangelists for it. You know, in the best sense of those terms, and it's always been something that's been exciting for me. I haven't had that opportunity, other than airlines and stuff. I had an uncle with a small plane that he would look at his fields with as a farmer. Some of my first jobs, I was working in the oil field, and we were flying off to rigs and platforms and stuff like that. And my first helicopter experience was awesome. I mean, it was just incredible to do that. And so I'm looking forward to talking more about that. Now, what brought you to the States? You grew up in Wales.
Yeah, I grew up in Wales. I'm from a little town called Haverfordwest in Pembrokeshire.
Mm-hmm.
And what brought me to America? Well, it's a big, long list of things. When I was going to high school in Wales, back in the 70s, the U.S. military landed in Britain en masse. And about 6 miles up the road from where I lived, there was an American U.S. Navy base. And lots of families there. All the kids, they came to our schools. So a lot of my friends growing up as a teenager were American kids. So, of course, I got familiar with America. Never been, but, I wore Levi jeans and sweatshirts and things like that. And I used to get invited over for Thanksgiving dinner, and I had my first bologna sandwich and just things like this. And, for a young boy in Wales, that was exciting. I passed my driving test at 17, and I was dating a girl. Her father had a 1974 banana yellow Corvette Stingray.
Oh, that's a good
one. Wow.
And he threw me the keys the day I passed my test and said, my daughter's never going to ride a bus again. Off you go. So that was my introduction to America, so to speak. And then when I was in the British Army, of course, we used to come across quite often to Fort Lewis in Washington State and operate out there and up at Yakima Ranges.
Right.
And so I came over a few times, loved America, and we came over on vacation to Disney World and things like that. Right. My wife, Terry, she lived in Britain for 26 years. She's American, and she's from Alabama, grew up in Huntsville. And sadly, 12 years ago, her father got very ill and passed. And she turned around to me one day and said, I want to go home. And so that's what we did.
Yeah.
We came over here in October of 2013.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you're here.
Well, thank you. I am glad I'm here as well. Barbecue. If you ask me what brought me to the States, people would expect me to say my wife, but I say barbecue brought me to the States.
And the bologna didn't turn you off, though. That's a
I
good
love
thing.
bologna.
So I do too. I do, but I
love
just
it.
didn't know.
No,
I've been to UK many times. I've never been to Wales though, so I've wanted to.
It's a beautiful country. It's the land of song. They call it the land of song, and the people are just so warm and friendly. There's more castles than you can shake a stick at. You trip over in Wales, you land in a castle.
Right.
Wow.
And that was one of the things for my wife. She's a writer. She's a published author, and she came over when she was young. Post university.
Right.
To research a book she was doing at the time, Arthur and Merlin, obviously. And she loved it and stayed. And she was actually over there as a little girl. Her father was commanding officer of a U.S. Army base in Wales. And down the bottom of her garden was Chepstow Castle. So she was a little princess with her own castle.
It was surreal as an American. When the first time I went, my dad was actually teaching drilling schools for Chevron. He was working for Chevron, and he was going to be doing some work up in the North Sea. And we took the train from London to Scotland and to Aberdeen. And looking out the window of the train, this I'd always heard of Britain, obviously. We've our ally, friends, and it seemed surreal. It seemed like I was watching a movie. It was the countryside, everything just, I loved it. And I love going back every time I can. So.
Well, that's one of the reasons we love living in Tennessee. We live in Giles County.
Okay.
In a little place called Diana, Tennessee. And it's Wales. The rolling hills and the trees and everything like that. It's just perfect. Yeah. People keep saying to me, "Are you going to move up to Tullahoma now?" I say no.
I don't blame you. I love Tullahoma, but that's beautiful country out there where you are. So now, as a kid, when did you get the bug for aviation? When was it something that you found interest in?
Well, that's easy. I was 10 years old. I was in an organization called Army Cadets in Britain, and it's sort of like Boy Scouts, come junior ROTC.
Right.
I was 10, and in the summer we would go off and stay in an army camp and drive tanks and trucks and things at 10 years old. And this base I went to, they had an aviation wing, and we went up in a Bell 47 helicopter. And if you don't know what the Bell 47 is, if you think MASH, that's the Bell 47 helicopter they use there. And the British Army used them at the time. They called them Sioux, as in the Sioux native tribe. And I was sitting there just loving it, and the experience was amazing. And I decided from that time on I was going to become an Army aviator. So that was it.
It's addicting. I talked about my oil field experiences. I remember as a kid, before I ever got to fly on one. Well, my dad used to have a seaplane that would land in the bayou out front. That would be the way he got to work. He worked 7 days on, 7 days off. They would land the plane in the bayou. We would take him out to the plane on our way to school, and he would fly off and fly back. And when hurricanes would come in regularly in the Gulf, we lived across the street from an elementary school, and Chevron would use that as an evacuation area. It was away from the Gulf and far enough, and they would fly these huge helicopters in. And I just remember those experiences, and it draws you in. I don't remember what it was called. I remember being down at my uncle, who lived more toward the coast, near the base, and they had one of these, I call it a big crane type helicopter. It looked like a huge... It was a helicopter with a big crane, and it carried huge weight, and gosh, I was just addicted to it. I never got to fly it, but I always wanted to be in it,
Yeah, absolutely. And why not want to fly it?
Oh my God. Well, I do. I just never have. I mean, it's not that I don't want to. Man, I would love it. So
I might take you up on that.
I will take you up on that.
If we can find somebody to lend us a helicopter.
I will absolutely take you up on that.
I can help in that department. I can find someone with a helicopter in here. I know people.
So, I mean, the military was your route. I mean,
I mean, it wasn't like a direct route,
Right.
you know. At 10 years old, I decided that's what I wanted to do. And then, you know, throughout school and things like that, I did very well at school. And I enjoyed school, believe it or not. Funnily enough, I enjoyed math. Didn't enjoy English so much, but I did all right at school. Now, at the time down in Wales, we only had to do 10 years of school. If you there was the option to take 12 years, but if you did the extra 2 years, it meant that you wanted to go to university, and you had to have that to go to university. So that was called sixth form. I didn't want to go to university. I wanted to be out earning and everything like that. So I actually officially left school when I was 14.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So probably as a sophomore equivalent year, or even as a freshman, actually, because we start school a year earlier and finish a year earlier. Yeah. So my birthday's in the summer, so I was 15 before I went back to school. So I was out. I was good. I did my 10 years, and I went and worked in a seaside resort as in a hotel, and I did that for 2 years and just had fun.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I wanted to experience life. And then when I was 17, I thought, I'd better do something with my life. Now, what do I want to do? Oh, yeah, I remember. I want to be a helicopter pilot. So that's what I did. I sort of geared myself towards joining the military, joining the Army. And I joined the Army at 18. Now, in the Army at the time, and it's still the same, and it's the same here, I think, in the U.S. Army Air Corps, when you join enlisted, you have to be in the Army for 4 years as a whatever job you do before you can apply to be aircrew. Well, I was actually in the Army for 3 years when I decided it's about time now. I can't wait any longer. So I applied for aircrew selection, and I went off down to Biggin Hill, Royal Air Force Biggin Hill. Now, in Britain, the RAF govern military flying. So if you're going to be an Army or a Navy pilot, you still have to pass the RAF selection. So I went down there, and there were 2 soldiers, and there were about 27 other people who looked like money, if you know what I mean.
Right.
They were wearing suits and their hair greased back, and they just, you know, wearing Cartier and Rolexes.
Right.
And I'm sitting there in my jeans and T-shirt thinking, what on earth am I doing here amongst this lot? And it was a 1-week selection process. And at the end of the week, there was only 2 people left. There was me and the other soldier. That was it. The rest had gone. They failed.
Wow.
And funnily enough, I never saw that guy again, ever.
Really?
So, and that was it. So I went up to the board. Once you've done the selection, you go up to the board and they say, you know, ask you a load of questions. And at the end, they said, well, you know, you passed selection, but we can't take you on as a pilot. And my whole world fell apart there.
Oh, I bet.
And I said, well, why, if I've passed selection? They said, you haven't been in the Army for 4 years, and that's a hard stop. And I thought, okay, fine. And he said, but we don't want to lose you, so what we're going to do is we're going to offer you an air crewman position for a year. So you can get used to it, get some experience, and then we'll load you on the pilot's course. And that's what I did. Now, my father once told me, if you find a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. So my whole career has been flying aircraft. I'm also a paramedic, so driving ambulances and rapid response vehicles, making lots of noise.
It was that Corvette that you got to drive right away. That's what it was.
And saving lives, of course.
That's just absolutely.
And now I'm a high school teacher, so I've never worked a day in my life. I've just had fun.
That's fantastic.
You know.
Yeah.
But obviously there's a serious element.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
But I love everything I've done in my career. And I think that's my motivation for the students I'm teaching. Is, you know, I could stand there and say, okay, this is this, that's that, and that's the way it's done, okay? Understand? If you don't, tough.
Right.
But I hope that they see my enthusiasm and my enjoyment. And that's what it's about with youth today.
Mm-hmm.
It's about showing them something that's exciting and fun, and I hope that's the job I do here.
I think that's so important. I was thinking actually this morning with some stuff I was reading and just thinking about motivation, and we see some students that are very successful in coursework and those kind of things. We see some that struggle, and it's not because they don't have the ability to it. Sometimes I think it's just because they can't connect it to real life, to life outside, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
you knew you didn't want to go to university.
Yeah.
You also had this passion for, this bug that was placed, when you were younger. And in some ways, I see that as a really important, there's the information, obviously, that we teach, but it's helping motivate students and connect those dots from learning to something that animates you, like aviation has animated you, it seems like.
I mean, absolutely, and you're really hit the nail on the head about realism.
Mm-hmm.
Because even with aviation, something for me as exciting as aviation, again in a classroom, the students are doing academic work, which they have to do. It's an important part
Right,
about it.
absolutely.
But you can show a video on the TV, you can do simulators and things, and the school has been very generous in the district and in the equipment that I have, and I'm just putting together a plan now for the next
Mm-hmm.
couple of years and what the budget's going to look like that. But it's still all, computer screens and TV screens and things like that. But then when you take them out into the real world and stick them in that helicopter or that aeroplane, and you see the transformation, and all of a sudden they understand that what they're doing in the classroom is important.
Mm-hmm.
I took a group of students a couple of weeks ago down to the Space and Rocket Center.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in my last school, of course, in Nashville, I couldn't do that because it was too far to go.
Yeah.
And it wasn't worth the trip for the students. I mean, it was fundamentally, but in time, it was not possible. But I took the students down, and they just loved it. And on the bus on the way back, there wasn't a peep out of them. They were asleep and just chatting about everything they'd done on this and that and the other and what they'd seen. Now, I've been teaching them that for the past however many months, but it only then dawned on them that this is what's possible. And now it's a different group of students I'm teaching. And of course, the students that didn't come on the school trip, they're all now wondering why they didn't, first of all. And secondly, the students that did go, they're so enthused and animated that it's infectious for the other students.
Absolutely.
And
I think we students are our best advocates when we have a program that's working and that does animate them in that way. Man, they'll spread the word. I mean, that it is infectious. I think that's a good word for it.
It is. And the best part about teaching, I mean, everything about teaching for me is wonderful. But the best part about it was what happens every week or so. I'll get a call from a past student. And, they call me up and they say, Mr. Rowe, and this, that, and the other, and they're so excited about it. And I get a call the other day while I was in class, actually. Now, normally in class, I'll have my phone on silent, and I won't answer the phone because it's instruction time. But the phone, I've not got it off, but it's on silent. But the phone lit up, and I saw that it was one of my past students. Now, this young man, Jason, I'll just call him Jason, that's his first name. He's at Fort Rucker at the moment on his Army pilot course. And he was the class of 2020. And with COVID, of course, the course has been elongated because they can't have so many recruits at the same time and students at the same time. And throughout his Army pilot course, he would call me up and say, we're doing this now, we're doing that now. And I remember when you said, and it helped because, he called me up the other day while I was in class. And so I answered it because, And I put it on speaker. I said, "Hey, Jason, we're on speaker now. I've got my students here with me. So do you mind if this isn't a private conversation?" He said, No, that's great. He said, "I just wanted you to know that I passed the basic helicopter course. They call it Common Core. And I've been allocated Apaches." And I remember, and he was crying. He was so happy and everything like that. And he was saying, "I remember when you said about Apaches this." And he said, "Whoa, it's hard. Whoa, it's hard." He said, I'm a little bit overwhelmed. And I said to him, "Jason, it's what I've told you all along. You're just being introduced to this now." I said, "They won't expect you to know it by tomorrow."
Right.
By Friday, yes, but not by tomorrow. I said, "So you got a little bit of time." And then I said, "So say hi to the students and tell them who you are." So he spoke, on speaker, spoke to the students and everything like that. And it was just wonderful. And, but yeah, so that's the sort of, it's almost a heritage.
Yes.
You know, it is. And just if you can change one life, then you've done your job.
I think that is so important. I working with college students, I'm on a text chain with some of my former students, and some of it's just sports and craziness.
Yeah.
But it's those connections, and when they come back with a story like that, and you hear it. Because the day-to-day, sometimes we get caught up in our routines and we don't realize what we're doing, right? Yeah. The long view helps us to see that, and once you've had a legacy of students like this coming through, you kind of get a long view of why we're doing an aviation program in a high school, for instance.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was reading an article in the Tennessean about your work at McGavick, and it was a kind of a floundering program there that y'all were able to move to another level. I don't know that we've ever had an aviation program at Tullahoma. We may or may not have. No. I don't know. Which, again, we said, I think before we went on air, I didn't even know that existed in a high school, So it was interesting in pathway with this. One of the things you've started is the High School Aviation Association, I believe. Yeah. And with a particular mission toward helping underrepresented youth get into aviation. And in the story you were talking about, as given your background, you talked about the only avenue you saw was going through the military. We've had a couple of pilots on in a previous episode, one that went the military route. He flew the U-2 spy plane and the stealth bomber. Another, the young woman that was a pilot, she kind of took a different route, taking it, there's other routes to get there. Tell me a little bit about your organization, about how that works, and then also about doing aviation at a high school. I mean, that's, I honestly didn't know how that would look.
It's crazy. It really is. I mean, I'm the same as you. In Britain, there's no concept of this. There probably is now. They're starting to introduce career and technical education in UK now, but no, when I was at school, we had wood shop and we had metal shop, and that was it, really. So when we came to the States, my wife is an American citizen, but she was as much a foreigner here after living in Britain for so long. I actually came here to be chief pilot of an air ambulance, and sadly, a little while after arriving here, I suffered a heart attack. I had open heart surgery, so it probably took me about 6 months to recover from that. And it was a huge life-changing moment.
Right.
And we had big decisions to be made, whether we were going to stay, whether we were going to go back to UK. But we elected to stay with support, amazing support. And I can't thank those people enough. And they know who they are. But then, of course, what am I going to do with my life? Because I lost my aircrew medical, and that's automatic. And while I was sort of floundering about, I worked as a ambulance crew in Huntsville ambulance. But of course, I needed a career, and I read a magazine article about aviation in high schools. And I thought, what? And then I saw an advert for a flight instructor in a high school in Nashville. And I thought, what's this all about then? So I called them up. And they explained what it was about. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Does the teacher need to be able to fly? And they said, oh, yeah, we need a pilot. I said, that wasn't the question. Listen closely. Does the pilot need to physically be able to fly? And they said, well, no, because it's all simulator based. And I said, I'm your man. Here we go. So I went up for an interview, and the interview went really well. And Dave Hubble, who was my principal, it turned out, he said, yeah, brilliant, brilliant. I'll speak to so-and-so, and we'll get it formalized. And I waited a year. Wow. Never heard anything back. And I'd given up.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
But by this time I was working with Hemsey. And we'd actually took a patient up to Nashville to the hospital up there, Vanderbilt. And as we pulled into Vanderbilt, my phone rang and it said McGavock High School. And I thought, yeah, okay. And it was Dave. He said, remember you came up for this interview? I said, vaguely. He said, are you still interested? I said, yeah, of course I am. And off I went up there. I will tell you, the first 2 years, yeah, I hope I never have to relive that. But I was actually quitting at the end of every day.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
I was. The stress was just... But it was character building.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
Now, I lived in Madison, Alabama at the time. So I had a 2-hour, 10-minute drive in the morning and in the afternoon. And if I got caught on 65 in traffic, it was a 3-hour journey.
Yes.
But you know, that 2-hour drive home, it de-stressed me.
Oh, yeah.
So by the time I'd get home, Terry'd say, hey, how'd it go today? And, you know, I'd say, well, are you going back tomorrow? Yeah, I guess I will. And I'm so pleased I did. But anyway, the program, it had failed. It was a failed program. It'd been running for 9 years. And the district were making a decision to either close it down or find somebody to make it work. And thankfully, they went with the latter. Yeah. So I said, okay, give me 2 years. Just give me 2 years. You know, I'll do what needs to be done as far as the academia side is concerned. But give me 2 years to build a program. And if it's going to work, it'll work by then. If not, you know, we've tried.
Right.
And that's what we did. And we turned the program around from a failing program to one of the top 5 in the country. But the top public high school, because the other 4 were charter or private. We formed relationships with Southwest Airlines, American Airlines, very good friends of mine now. Brad Morrison at American and Anna Schwager up at Southwest. And of course, for a school, that's a huge gain to have industry partners, not just industry support, but partnerships.
Well, it draws those real connections we were talking about from the academic side to real world opportunities, more than just pilots. I mean, there's so many opportunities for students in that, right?
Absolutely. And then there was a competition, and what my aim was to expose the program as much as possible. And get it out there. And I also decided that I wanted to really lift high school aviation up out of the, it's just another shop. You know, to a viable training and education platform. And one of the ways was Harbour Freight were offering this competition. So I entered it. And we got second place. And... It was interesting because when they announced a shortlist, and I was on the shortlist, which was exciting. And by that time, I thought I'd better go and tell the principal because, you know, it's the school. And but the actual winners were never going to be notified. They were just going to be turning up at the school.
Oh, wow.
And the day they were going to be turning up at the school was the October 24th. I remember that day, 2019 or 19. And come there's two stories I want to tell about that. But come the 24th, I'd heard nothing from anybody.
Right.
And my principal came in the classroom and he said, "Hey, Mr. Rowe, did you ever hear anything about that competition? You know, what they called? You know." I said, "Nah, not really." I said, "Did you hear anything?" He said, "No, I haven't heard anything." So I said, "Well, then it's, we weren't successful." Right. He said, "Oh, well, it's good that you were shortlisted," yes, and everything." And he walked out of the classroom. And then about 10 seconds later, this entourage just burst in. And I'd got second place, and I was so happy with that. And the kids. Now, the other story around that was we were forming relationships with the airlines. Mm-hmm. And Brad Morrison, who's a good friend of mine now, from American, called me. He wasn't my friend then, but, right, He said, "Hey, we've heard something about your program. We're looking for high schools to, to take a look at and see how you're doing. Can we come up and visit?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." He said, "Well, give us a few dates and we'll see, how it fits in with us." And I said, "Okay, October 24th. Now, this was sort of back in the early fall, so I didn't know whether we were going to win or anything.
Right.
But I thought, hey, if we did, Anyway, so he said, "Yeah, okay." And on the 24th, they arrived, Brad and right, two of his staff. They came up from Dallas-Fort Worth. And about an hour later, of course, this entourage burst in. and Brad is like sitting there going, "What is going on?" And they were there for about 2 or 3 hours. And when they'd all left, I went up to Brad and said, "Look, I'm so sorry for neglecting you." I said, but he said, "No." He said, this is what we're looking for." Mm-hmm. And it's great because the relationship now is amazing. And it only benefits the students. And
absolutely.
That's my only agenda on this, is how it affects the students. And that's what I'm hoping to be doing here at Tullahoma. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the relationship, so to speak, although it was a relationship with me.
Right.
I was merely a spokesperson for the school I was at
right,
the time. So there are relationships between the airlines and those industry partners with McGavock. But, when I came down to Tullahoma, I said, "Hey, I'm at a new school now. And it's called Tullahoma High School, and I'm wondering," and they said, "Well, absolutely. Yeah. You're the person that initiated right, this. So, but we're just going to sit by and have a look for a little while." Mm-hmm. And of course, that's what they have to do.
Well, aviation has been such a key part. When I moved here, I'd never heard of Tullahoma before. Mm-hmm. We've been here about 20 years now. We moved in. In fact, when I Googled Tullahoma, the first thing that popped up was Jack Daniels, to be honest. Yeah. And then when we get here, I found out about the base, and everybody was, so many people we met was connected with that. And the job I was in then, I would travel a good bit, and I started, when I would tell people where I was from, mm-hmm, so many people knew it because of the base and because of the UT Space Center and because of Huntsville and some of these things. And we've got a legacy of aviation here that is, I think, Tullahoma High School should have an aviation program. Yeah. Is kind of the way I look at this,
I remember when I was in middle school, maybe high school age, I remember the airport out here would have air shows, mm-hmm, on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah.
And like not mom and pop air shows, like the Thunderbirds came, right, and like these, big time acts, the
right,
aerobatic stuff. Like, it was a bit like, this is a big aviation town, not only because of the base, but because of where we're located, I'm sure regionally in the U.S. as well, too. So
I still have a lot of people wanting me to jump out of perfectly good airplanes over here, too. That's not, we haven't quite got into that yet.
And to speak on that, Tullahoma has one of the best skydiving facilities right, in the entire state. I know people who live over near Knoxville, and they're like, well, we have opportunities here to go skydiving, but the one in Tullahoma has rave reviews and is really good. So
no, I've heard that. Yeah. I mean, but all that to say, I mean, with that legacy here, it at least gives a good foundation to build a program. I'm assuming at a high school like this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the support of the community, the aviation community, and the community at large in Tullahoma is amazing. And much like you know, being from Britain and sort of dabbling in America prior to coming here full time, I'd never heard of Tullahoma. But I actually visited here about 4 years ago, and so there's an organization called AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and they had an AOPA fly-in here at Tullahoma. And of course, I'm an aviation geek.
Right.
In Britain, we call them an anorak.
Oh, really?
You know. And I'd heard of this fly-in, AOPA fly-in at Tullahoma, so I drove up and saw lots of friends there. And it was fun, but that was it.
Right.
And then while I was up at McGavock, I was contacted by a lovely person here, Shell, and she works for Tullahoma City Schools. And she said, hey, you know, why don't you come down to Tullahoma and teach? But at the time, I was happy up in, you know, and I'd never thought about moving. And, you know, at my stage of life, moving is just difficult. It
Exactly.
is. But, you know, she was great. And eventually, she just got on my nerves. And I said, okay, I'm coming. And it's amazing. It's wonderful. But the support, you know, from the airport, director up there, John, and, you know, all of the people I've met at the airport, and General Miller and people like that. And from the base, and from the Beechcraft Museum.
Oh yeah, I forgot about Beechcraft. Yeah,
that was a surprise to me. I didn't when I discovered that we had that here.
Yeah,
unbelievable. You know, Charles is it's such a wonderful. Now, I live in Diana, which is about 8 or 9 miles north of Pulaski. So Pulaski's our local sort of shopping place and everything like this. And I've got some good ties now in Pulaski, and of course, Walter Beach was born in Pulaski.
Right.
And for me, that's aviation. So Pulaski for me now is my town. But you're right. The first time I drove into, because when I come up for that AOPA fly-in 4 years ago, whatever it was now, I didn't actually come into Tullahoma because you go up that back road.
Right.
But the first time I drove on to the Jackson Street to go for the interview for this job, there's aircraft all over the place, and I think, wow, this is great. And then when I went for my interview at the school, you know, Jason Quick was there, and there was I think there was 9 other people there from the community and the aviation community interviewing me, and you know, it was a bit intimidating, really.
I bet.
But no, I enjoyed the interview. I turned it around and interviewed them.
Well, and I tell people when they're going on an interview, you are interviewing them as well as them
absolutely.
interviewing. That's the way it's got to be.
Absolutely. So. But they were wonderful. They, you know, and they had clear focus and a clear sort of pathway to what they wanted to achieve. And, you know, they've put their trust in me to do that because, you know, as much as they want what they want for the community, you know, with their support, obviously, it is up to me, you know, to help them achieve that. And you know, I'd like to thank them for putting their trust in me to achieve that.
Well, it's obviously your passion. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, just from hearing your story with it, and is the nonprofit, is that something you've been doing for a while, or is that a new thing, or?
Well, no, it's not really new. What I decided was, well, while I was doing this at McGavock, you know, with my group of students, so I taught 3 classes. In fact, no, I taught 6 classes at McGavock. I'm doing 3 classes here per semester, but I was doing 6 classes up at McGavock. And so I was affecting, you know, maximum of 25 students per class. So 6 classes, 150 students. And I could see the impact it was having on them. And then I thought, well, why can't I do this and spread it out a little bit? I'd been to a couple of seminars about high school aviation with AOPA, and I saw that although high school aviation was emerging, it was very disjointed, very chaotic. Everybody was sort of doing their own thing, but wanting guidance and stuff like that. And I thought, well, okay, what can I do? So I started off by just speaking with other schools and other teachers and other directors and CTE directors and things like this. And then I thought, well, I better formalize this. So I created the High School Aviation Association. And that, I never registered it. It was just a name I had. So if people wanted to call me, and I put a website up and everything, if people wanted to call me, I never charged any money for it. If they needed, help with curriculum, help with teachers, that's what I would do. And I never got payment for it. I never asked for payment. And but it just grew and grew and grew, and I was getting phone calls all of the time. And I'd say, "Hey, well, where did you hear about me from?" "Well, I was talking to so and so and so and so, and they gave me your number." So then I was up at Oshkosh Adventure.
EAA, yeah.
EAA Oshkosh, yeah, and in 2017, that was my first time there.
It's amazing.
Wow!
I've been twice, and it's so cool.
It is aviation overload.
Yeah, I've never been.
My aunt and uncle live in Appleton, which is like a 20 or 30 minute drive from EAA, from Oshkosh, excuse me. And it's, everything that you can imagine flies in there.
Oh, amazing. And, met a few people up there and were talking to them and about the association and things like this. And then they said, well, why don't you formalize that now? And you can apply for grants and you can apply for this and that. Well, I'd never thought about that before. I just did it as I was doing favors for people. Yeah. But I sat down and a friend and I put together what we now call Aviation USA. So that's the sort of the newest organization, and that's formalized. We're chartered in Tennessee. We're a 503 non-profit, and we work with underrepresented students all over the country. And we're working up in, and I've got to say this correctly, or she is going to have a go at me, Lafayette, Indiana. Or Lafayette, Indiana.
I'm from Louisiana. It's Lafayette is the way I say it. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Now, but Tennessee.
But if it's in Indiana, it's probably the opposite.
It's the opposite because I keep getting it wrong.
Yeah,
whenever
here
I get
they
it
say
wrong,
Lafayette.
It's a north and south thing. Yeah.
Whenever I get it wrong, she says no. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So we've got a program up there now. We've got programs in another program in Indiana, down in Texas. California, so all over the country. And we're also working with other organizations. Now, I got a phone call, about 2 years ago. And this guy said, hey, my name's Carrie. I the founder of Independence Science. And we're an organization for the blind. And he said, we translate, schoolwork into Braille and for non-sighted people, blind people, and we're looking at an aviation pathway. Is what can you do to help? And I said, you tell me what we need and what you need, and we'll work together. So he said, well, we'd like people to become mechanics and administrators and air traffic controllers and things like that. And so I said, yeah, that would work. And they said, we'd also like people to be able to fly. And I said, as a pilot? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. Now, I'm not one of these people that would say, no, that's never going to happen.
Right.
I might be thinking it, but I'm not going to say it. And I said, okay. So I said, what's going through my head now is the fact that, we can have a safety pilot fly with the student, with the blind person. And he said, nope, we want them to be able to fly independently.
Wow.
And that's exactly what I said. Wow, okay. So, you know, I'd only recently been for my flight medical. I've got my flight medical back now, by the way, but I'd recently been for my flight medical. And the biggest part of the test, of course, is vision. So I said, I'm going to have to really think a lot about that, because, of course, it's not just the fact that the blind student, is now flying an airplane independently. It's what is the FAA going to say about it? And what are the aircraft manufacturers going to say about it? But through that sort of journey now, I've discovered that there is technology out there. And it's a little camera you can sort of pin to the side of your glasses. It's got a camera and it's got an earpiece, not an earpiece, but just like a cell phone. And it's called iCam. And the first generation of iCam could read the script and read it back.
No kidding.
But the second generation, iCam 2, has object recognition and face recognition. So, for example, the blind person wearing this walks in this room and says, you've entered a dark room. There are 3 people sitting 10 feet in front of you. And you walk up, put your hand out and say, hey, I'm Derek. And you would say, hi, I'm Mike, and hi, I'm Mike. And now the next time I walk in the room with this technology on, it'll say, you've entered a dark room. There are 3 people sitting in front of you. One is Mike and the other is Mike. So you can walk up and say, hi, Mike, how are you? And you know, airplanes these days are basically flying computers, modern aircraft. So why can't we interface this technology with the aircraft technology? And this can become the safety pilot then, but the blind pilot is still flying the aircraft.
That is fascinating.
That is hurting my head just trying to comprehend how modern technology and science and medical advances are progressing at a rate that they are. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
That's even a possibility.
But you know, and the sort of motivation for programs like this, of course, is it's reaching more underrepresented students,
Absolutely.
so blind and if we can do that for blind students, why can't we do it for deaf students, etc., etc.? Now, another one of my big needs is, you know, when I was at McGevick High School, we had a special education program there. And it's all about inclusion and things like that, which I'm a big advocate of. But I noticed at the school, and you know, this isn't a negative point, this is a positive point, but I noticed that the special education students were doing they weren't doing schoolwork, coursework, they weren't in the classrooms. You know, they were collecting, recycling and delivering mail and things like that. And they would go and visit classrooms and things. But so I said to my principal one day, hey, you know, the special ed kids, why aren't they in classes the same as all the other students? And you know, obviously they worry about if it's going to be too much of a challenge for the students and too challenging for teachers. And I said, well, you know, let's have a look. So I said, well, send some down to my class. And they called my bluff. And so I had 6 special ed students come in, and you know, with varying different abilities and things like that. And but the transformation was amazing.
Wow!
In one semester, you know, one young man, and I won't say his name, his disability was psychological. You know, he'd gone through a horrendous life, and it had affected him very deeply. And he would come into class and. You know, he wasn't capable of anything academic or anything, but I sat him on a simulator and said, off you go. Wow, he just loved it. And about 2 months later, I took him flying, transformed, absolutely transformed. And but, you know, why should students with different abilities not, you know, have the same opportunities? And obviously, with care and understanding and things like that. So that's what Aviation USA is about. And again, you know, when we work with a program, so if somebody comes to us and says, hey, we'd like to open, and it's not necessarily a high school program, it's a youth program. We'd like to, you know, start an aviation youth program. how do we go about it? And we don't charge them any money. What we do is, obviously, it's going to cost them money.
Yes.
But we work with that group in fundraising, and we fundraise as Aviation USA on behalf of that group. And so, you know, they haven't got the stress or the worry of anything like that. And it's working very well. It's
fascinating. My mind is flying through.
Pun intended.
Yes, not intended, but it works.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about the SPED students. I was thinking about the blind students. You know, creativity comes from imagination, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and it was funny. I was speaking to Rotary last week, actually, and one of the people in the audience asked if there was a generation gap with us, and I didn't fully follow the question. At the same time, I was like, yes, I kind of like generation gap because they're seeing things differently than the other generation did, and that's where progress happens, right? And being open to say, I don't know, but then finding out. I mean, honestly, I'm rambling a little bit, but I was thinking about we think about aviation really in this term, right? But when you start adding this technology that, what did you call the
ICAM, it's called.
When you start adding that technology in, and the folks that develop that, when you start looking at just how this branches out into all sorts of different ways, you know, it's just it's exciting, and my imagination kind of goes wild.
And that kind of leads into my next question. If I'm a high school student and I want to sign up for your program, am I closer, or if I am, how much closer am I to working towards my private pilot license, or to be able to fly, you know, or to go down that path independently? Maybe I'm not going into the military where I'm going to get that training, you know, paid for by the military. How can I take your class and get that first few steps into aviation?
I mean, the whole point of my program is, you know, my remit is not to turn people into pilots.
Sure, yeah.
You know, but it's to give them the opportunity to become pilots.
Sure.
And to show them that if they can succeed doing this, then they can succeed at anything they put their mind
Absolutely.
to. So that's the whole premise of it. Now,
because statistically, not everyone is going to be a pilot.
Oh, no.
When I taught digital arts at the high school, I knew that not every one of my students were going to be a graphic designer or a photographer. But like you said, you're still giving them tools to exceed in whatever their focus is.
Yeah. But if you think about this, now one of the big teaching tools is to bring in guest speakers. And I will, obviously, people think, well, you're going to bring in airline pilots, you're going to bring in air traffic controllers and everything like this. But yes, absolutely. But I also bring in everyday people off the street. So I have a very good friend, Larry, and he runs a very successful business, and he owns aeroplanes. Now, he's not a professional pilot, but he owns aeroplanes and he flies them. He flies them for work. So if he's got a client down in, you know, Tupelo, he'll get in his airplane and fly over to Tupelo. But he comes into class and he'll say, okay, who wants to be a pilot? And, you know, 2 or 3 students will put their hands up. And then he'll say, okay, let me tell you my story about being a pilot. And he said, and I'm going to put it in your terms. He said, when I come home from work on a Friday afternoon, he said, I usually like to leave the office a little earlier because I'll come home and I'll say to my 2 daughters, and he's got 2 lovely daughters, and his wife, what would you like for dinner tonight? And somebody might say, well, we haven't had deep pan pizza for a while, so we'll go down the airport, get in the airplane and fly to Chicago and have deep pan pizza. And then we fly home and it's time for bed. And next week, well, we haven't had gumbo for a while, so we'll get in the airplane and fly over to...
Now you're talking.
Now the students are going, what? Hang on a minute, hang on. And then after his little talk, he'll say, so who wants to be a pilot now? Whoom, and the hands go up. And you see, I've got them hooked there,
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, because as much as my career has shown me, taught me, as much as I've experienced, and I've experienced some hairy things, let me tell you. As far as my students are concerned, I'm their teacher.
Yeah.
Yes.
And no matter what I say, I'm still just their teacher. But when I bring people in to speak to them, they see them as that person.
Yeah.
You know, and it's exciting, you know. I mean, I can't tell you some of the things I've done on air when I was in the military, but can it go back that far? Is there? But, you know, I flew in Kenya, and I'll tell you a story about that. We would go to Kenya. It was about 14 weeks we were out there, and we were at Nanyuki, which is in the foothills of Mount Kenya. And we were there for command and control and medevac and things like this, transportation. But one of our jobs was every morning, because of course we got troops there firing live rounds, and there's no ranges like, you know, there's just bush. And so the troops would go out into the bush to go live firing exercises. And of course there's animals there, wild animals. And, you know, my job at 6 a.m. every morning, 2 helicopters would take off and go and herd all of the animals out of a specific area. So we herded elephant, buffalo, zebra, giraffe, lions, and it was just truly amazing. The sun is just coming up, and we're hover taxiing at about 30 feet, just herding the animals out so the troops can go in and do their live firing. Did that, you know, people pay thousands of dollars for that.
Yes.
And here's a little tip on that note. If you ever go on safari in Kenya, don't look for animals because you'll never find them because they're camouflaged.
Yeah.
Look for the white tourist buses.
They're everywhere.
Because that's how we used to find the animals. You know, so to experience that, and I got paid to do that. That's the crazy part about it. I'd have done it for free. Really.
Right, absolutely.
And, you know, when I tell that story to my students, they just look at me like, what? But you're just a teacher, you know? And but now if you came in and told them that story, you'd be their hero.
Yeah. I could come tell them that story and then say, this is that guy that did that.
Tricked you.
I'll tell him the story.
Tricked you.
Well, I think, what would you tell that young kid back in Wales, sitting where you are now?
You know, that is $1 million question. It really is. First of all, I would tell myself the lottery numbers.
Yeah, naturally.
Right, that's good.
That's
smart. I have not thought about that. I think that's a good thing.
But what would I tell? The only person who can limit what you do is you.
Wow.
And really, and that's it, you know, because when I was growing up and I wanted to be in the army and I wanted to be a pilot, you know, people would say to me, you'll never become a pilot. You'll never, and you'll never, and you know, you listen to that and you think, well, okay, they must know, they must be right. But no, if you've got a dream, you go for it. And I had people telling me, no, you'll never be a pilot. Right. You're going to be working in the coal mines or the factory or whatever. But you know, I had one, he was a friend and then he wasn't a friend because he was a real pessimist. You know, he would be so negative. You're never going to be a pilot. You're stupid. You're this, you're that. And I thought, no, I'm not going to listen to that anymore. Now, he went on to university and I sort of quietly sort of like admired him. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? But I remember I went back down to visit my parents, and I'd retired from the army by now, so I had more time. So I went down to visit, and sadly my dad had passed by then. And so I went down, my mum was there, and she wanted to go down to visit my dad. So I went down with her. And, you know, it's very tough. But while we were there, this work van pulled up in the cemetery. And while we were walking up to the gate, my mother and I, And this van pulled up, and the guy sort of rolled his window down and said, "Derek, wow." He said, "I've been and this and that, and you've been a pilot and you lived in America." And he was just blown away by it. And I'm saying, yeah. And he said, "Well, I got to go. I'm busy." And,
Right.
so off he drove. And my mother looked at me. She said, "You don't have a clue who that was, do you?" And I said, "Nope." And she said, "That's Charlie, your best friend at school."
Oh, wow.
I thought, wow, But yeah, that's what I would tell.
I think you've hit on a thing that we've seen that over and over again on the podcast with folks talking about that. And really one of my philosophies in what I do is I want a student to be able to live their own story. They get to write that.
Yeah.
And so many people get caught up in someone else's story. What you can't do that, or this is what you're expected to do. And I think that's a good word, actually. And it's something we've heard with stories that, the details are completely different, but the underlying foundation of how they got to where they are, I just think that's wonderful that you would tell that young kid that would be some good advice to tell him. So
we had a Tullahoma High School graduate a couple of weeks ago, well, before Christmas, I think, Will Heltsley.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I know the name.
He's a graduate here, 2000.
Yep.
Class 2000. And he's vice president at SpaceX.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Yep,
I did.
yep.
That's right.
And wow. And at the end of his talk, he said, "Are there any questions?" And this student sort of put his hand up and said, "Yeah." And he said, "So, a lot of times you might get a job that you think you can do, but then you realize when you get the job that you can't do it. How do you deal with that?" And that was a brilliant question.
Brilliant question. Very good.
And Will said, "You know what?" He said, "I'll answer that question for you now because I've been in that situation." He said, "I might be a VP at SpaceX, but he said, my philosophy is this: fake it till you make it."
Yep. Yeah. I got to sit in on a couple of those things with Will over at the high school, and I heard that exact question and that exact answer. I was sitting in the back, and I was like, "Oh wow!" That is actually, because you get a promotion and you go to another department, or you go to a whole new job, and you're unfamiliar with it at first. So it's just like, all right, I got to feel my way through this, talk to other people who have been here. We've got to kind of work through this, and it's kind of like how Mike and I started this podcast.
That's right.
We watched some YouTube videos. We reached out to some people. We asked them questions. We started piecing together technology, and then we thought about how do we format it. To use the cliche, we kind of had to build the ship as we were floating.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, and that's sort of the casual definition of lifelong learning, though.
Yes,
right?
it is.
We're always consider myself an expert, sometimes that's a static condition. When I see myself as always learning something new, it opens us up to new things. So,
well, Mike normally always has the last question, but I have to ask you this, and I'm asking this because, and Mike doesn't know this question's coming. Mike's a big soccer fan. I watch it casually. You're from England, so we have to ask, is there an allegiance to a Premier League team?
Unfortunately, no, because I'm a rugby player.
Oh, there you go.
But having said that, no, I can't. No.
I will say this about rugby.
Yeah.
I don't understand it fully, but I thoroughly enjoy watching.
Yes.
And I think for Americans, it's close, and there's some similarities to our. It's some of the best running backs I've ever seen. Right? There's a comparison to our football.
One of my closest friends actually he's from Texas. He went to University of North Texas and actually was on a collegiate rugby team at UNT. And he said it was one of the coolest experiences of his life. And they actually got to go to Scotland as a whole team and visit and see a facility and an organization, and got to see I'm assuming it's called a match. Got to see a game, a match, whatever you call it. And they said it was a really cool experience. And their team actually went to a playoff type situation where they were competing. And he said it was a really cool experience.
A few years ago, there were some Tullahoma High School students that started playing.
Yeah, this was back in early to mid 2000s. It's shortly after I graduated in 06, so it was shortly after that. the Tullahoma and Coffee County High School, believe it or not, combined to make a team. And they only were, I think, around for a year or two, maybe 3. But their very first inaugural year, there wasn't a huge amount of schools in Middle Tennessee doing this, but they actually went and they won a state title.
Wow.
It was club level. It wasn't necessarily school sponsored, but it was 2 schools coming together to make a rugby team. And there for like the 2 to 3 years that it was going, it had a good following. But I just think either the time of year or the finding coaches or everything, it just kind of dissipated. But it was a cool experience there for a little while, because I would go and I was like, all right, so now they're in like a scrum, and now they're.
I never understood lifting them up in the air when they bring the ball in. But anyway.
Anyways, we could go on that for forever. But Derek, we thank you so much for making some time to come talk with us, and you've really opened our eyes to quite a few things in the aviation world. So thank you so much.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
Always.
Appreciate it.
All right. For Mike Young, I am Michael Holliday, and this has been 2 Mics and a Guest. We'll see you next time.